All right, everybody. Welcome. Coming at you a little late tonight. Sorry about that. Today is Monday, January 4th, 2021. We made it. Surprise, surprise. You are here for another year. New gear, no fear. We are in this for sure. Don't worry about it. Believe me, there are an infinite number of things that can happen. And, you are involved in the process as to whether or not that happens. Now, I know what people say. They're like, oh, well, what I say doesn't matter. What I do doesn't matter. Well, how do you think collectively things happen? Enough people participate in the proliferation of something, and that's how you have a meme. That's how something becomes popular. I think that everyone has a role to play in all things, big and small, whether they'd like to believe it or not. And to believe otherwise is, I think, part of the attitude, the culture of, sort of abstaining from responsibility. Uh, I think what we do matter. I think what we say matter. And I think what we think matters. So allowing a person to make mistakes, to believe fallacies, and to fall on their ass is part of the process of growth. You cannot sort of create this edict of like a certification of intelligence per per groupthink, per whatever the demographic you're speaking with determines is relevant and worthy in order to have your public sphere, your public forum. The two don't mix. You can't again, unless you are purposefully inciting like hate or violence, you can't necessarily demonstrate open-mindedness, quote unquote, and inclusivity while excluding mainly points of opposition. Like that doesn't the two contradict each other. On another note, for viewers, as you can see, I have a light, and if this lighting is off or terrible, I'm not sure. I think it's okay, but I don't really know. Making this up as I go. That's part of the adventure. That's part of the journey. Please put in the comments. Give me all the tips and critiques that you can or would like to. I really do appreciate it. I really do read them. The one or two that I've gotten in the last 2 months. But again, this is the beginning of a journey, and it's just one step, one incremental step at a time. So I'm excited to do it. With that being said, today we are going to go through the update of things that happened over the weekend, over the new year. A little bit of Julian Assange news. I had to whip this up kind of quickly. Some post-stimulus news. We already heard about Pelosi and McConnell's houses being burglarized. I'm sure we talked about that before. And my whole thing about it is I can applaud the bicameral or bipartisan effort. The view of the matter that both of them are responsible to blame, and as representatives of their parties' attitudes, not as a whole, but for the most part, their parties are responsible and are to blame. This is why you follow a policy or principle and not a political party, a politician, or a person. Okay? These things are fallible, but an idea can be renewed, revamped, revisited, re-understood and misunderstood, and it can be taken advantage of. But an idea still is malleable and has a chance. When people fall and falter in the court of public opinion, credibility is lost, thereby removing any hope of them, being effective. We as society moves forward, I think, become further and further removed from the idea of redemption. It's this thing of like one and you're done. Depending on what it is, right? So don't even get me started, because we're also going to go into things like Seattle. I think I've talked about this before, I believe. Seattle trying to implement a law that validates, hundreds of felonies. I don't want to say over 100, but hundreds of felonies, including, from what I remember, harassment, theft, trespassing. I believe I've spoken about my experience being homeless, and so you have to do that by a case-by-case basis. Like in California, you can be arrested for sleeping on the beach. It's called illegal lodging. But the judge then, once you arrive at court, because if you don't go to court, you get what's called a failure to appear felony warrant. And so they arrest you like on site. Like if they recognize you, they arrest you, or if they stop you again and run your name, and like, oh, you haven't been to court for this ticket, so you got a failure to appear warrant. But if you do happen to show up somehow, right, as a destitute vagabond, as a transient human with no home, let alone a telephone. Well, I mean, these days you can get a government phone, but I digress. If you happen to show up, manage to show up, the judge will look at it and be like, all right, and toss it out, because he knows not only do you have any income, but all you were doing was sleeping on the beach. But to justify other acts based on the justifiable to some extent, but not really, idea of poverty. That's the whole concept, is that if you can claim poverty, or being impoverished, I should say, then you can, be let off the hook. But with that being said, let's dig into it. Please, before we do, like, share, and subscribe. And, really, above all else, just, share the video. And if you like what I'm doing, that is. And if you don't, you're hearing this guy who's just going on, and you're just like, you know what, shut the fuck up. And you still manage to keep listening after that. I appreciate it. And I appreciate people who listen to sort of oppositional opinions. Keep doing what you do and be well with yourself. But with that being said, let's dig into it. As always, we start with a little tech here. For the listeners, oh, that's terrible. So it says Meat Walker, the smart companion of the future. And it's one of those little robots. That's all I can say. It's one of those little iRobot types. The UB Tech Robotics is stepping up its game with its new robot, Walker, which happens to be my last name. So it's a bipedal humanoid robot that has arms, hands, and can manipulate objects. And it's going through like a montage of all the things it's doing. It's like playing piano. It's playing with bricks. And this is the future. We will always take a look at this. Can you imagine controlling this with your Neuralink? It's actually pouring you a drink. You can have a robotic bartender. It also has sensing systems that ensure it can walk steadily on a variety of surface like carpet and marble. Rich people. Some other cool features that Walker offers includes face and object recognition and smart home control. And it can even interact with your children and play your music. It can become your Alexa. This means Walker will be able to control things like lighting or heat. And it also says it wants Walker to enhance a person's life at home one day. The Black Mirror come true. I mean, of course. Oh, the robot is actually signing, I believe. Wow. The sophistication of robotics is inevitable, and it continues to bemuse and worry me as to how quickly we are integrating, automation, robotics into our everyday living and sometimes in our critical living. Now, here's the thing. Automation and robotics can improve life, for example, at a nursing home, but you remove the human element, and that's pretty much the last vestige that they have of connection other than the people who come and visit them if they get visits. Not only that, but I always also worry continuously about the dangers of malfunction. Now, this is a neat one. This is pandemic related. It's one of those, it's a designer mask with a purifier on the mouthpiece that lights up, radiating from the purifying mouthpiece on the mouth end outward. Now, it lights up to tell you if the air quality is poor, so that'll be great in like China and India. The R per nano mask was made with cyclists in mind. Interesting. It's built to filter bacteria, pollen, and other small toxic particles. A prototype was revealed at CES 2019, right on time, with lights that change according to the surrounding air quality. It links to an app that can calculate the life of the filter. Of course, it would be interesting to link that. Oh, and it also provides a real-world, real-time pollution data tracker. Oh, something like that can be tied to the COVID proximity app for sure. That's an easy done and done. I would wear that mask. The problem is that I wouldn't want it to be alarming, and it probably would flash all sorts of colors and stuff. Alert, COVID, alert. Again, it's invasive, but at least that is pretty useful. That I can understand that for sure. But again, I just think that that's effective in and of itself. The two of the most pollutant countries in the world, China and India, I feel like since they collectively as a culture wear masks anyway, right? But we live in a mask culture, despite everything. And by the way, we're also going to read. We'll try to disseminate. It's a research paper, so it'll be scientifically jargoned up. But it should be fine. It should be fun, actually. I was going over it a little bit. But there's a paper talking about New Zealand lockdowns being effective. New Zealand lockdowns and I believe mask mandates as well. But to continue on the tech tip, do you guys know the Stingray, right? So the Stingray, I believe it's, the Stingray with it basically looks like it's flying in the ocean, right? It's elegant, beautiful, majestic creature that it is. I believe that's what also killed Steve Irwin. But, we're not going to make it too morbid. But this marine biotics company, I believe it's a marine biotics company, made a surveillance drone, an underwater surveillance drone that is in the chassis of a Stingray. And I mean, besides how creepy that is, it's fascinating to look at. It's a beautiful looking thing. But it's a underwater, an unmanned aquatic vehicle, still a UAV. This drone can be used as a generator for surveillance missions. It's called the Velox. The Velox. Like velocity, but not. Pinland Energy Systems is a marine robotics company. They began as a renewable energy company. The idea was to use undulating fins to harness the flow of water to generate electricity. If you take out the robotic aspect, you take out Velox's brain, take out all the sophisticated things that are going on here, and just make it two fins on some kind of transmissible system. Exactly. You've got a generator. Now, this could be scaled up and could be gigantic in the East River. But instead, they made a drone generating electricity for New York City, he says. They're just showing it for listeners. They're just showing it in underwater. And so it was developed by Pinland Energy Systems for over 2 years. That can be so easily weaponized. Although its original purpose was to serve as a generator, it is now a drone. The investors saw other potential. Right. So the creatives and the R&D intelligent types, they wanted to create a sophisticated near renewing source of energy. Instead, they pivoted due to investors and created this drone. Not surprising. It's still fascinating though. It's got a variety of uses. But they of course talk about it, delivering ammo and being a mine sweeper, things like that. So But last but not least, this one's really strange. This is a synthesizer, right? So it's a keyboard, and in front of the keyboard, about a foot away, is a large, not large. It's like a board. Like a game board, not like a game board. I'm terrible at this. So the chattering teeth that Joker has? It's a wooden board with those teeth. It's like those teeth, it looks like 5 by 5 on a 5 by 5 plank of wood. It's inserted into them. And what's happening is that the synthesizer, the keyboard, is corresponding with the teeth. Why would someone invent this? I mean, again, it's interesting. It's neat. It serves no practical purpose, and quite frankly, I think it would get really irritating. But technology, right? This is mostly my Mashable Twitter that I'm looking at. I have an obsession with Mashable. They always have strange, obscure tech. I'm gonna open up the floor to other stuff probably later this week. I just trying to curate and figure out what I want to draw from is an issue, and Mashable kept popping up with interesting things. Like, all right, I'll just use Mashable for now. But we're definitely gonna diverge into other things. It's gonna be fun. Gonna introduce some work by Zachariah Sitchin and actually Madame Helena Blavatsky and Graham Hancock, and we're gonna get into alternative anthropology and sociology. It's gonna be fun. For now, let's remain grounded. Mr. Assange, poor Assange. So even after everything, right, even after initially during Trump's campaign run, he was touting Julian Assange as a hero. He was a supporter. He was saying that his incarceration and subsequently his entrapment in the Venezuelan, I believe, embassy was criminal, because he was like losing his mind. He was like wiping his fecal matter on the wall and stuff. He was going crazy. He still is. His mental health is deteriorating to the point where a UK judge deemed him unfit mentally to be extradited to the U.S. on espionage charges. Now, mind you, how you can charge someone who published the material that was stolen for espionage is beyond me, because they didn't take it themselves, right? Not only that, but furthermore, you would think exoneration would be in the cards if what he ended up revealing was a series of, constitutional illegalities that the likes of which no one has ever seen before, because the technology didn't exist before, right? And that, among many other things, on many other countries, no less. But The Guardian reads, Julian Assange will make a fresh bid to be released from prison on Wednesday after a British judge ruled that he cannot be extradited to the U.S. To face charges of espionage and of hacking government computers. It's amazing to me. He's not a hacker. He's kind of a publisher. Lawyers for U.S. authorities are appealing against the ruling at the Old Bailey, which rejected arguments that the WikiLeaks co-founder would not get a fair trial in the U.S., but blocked extradition on the basis that procedures in prisons there would not prevent him from potentially taking his own life. I feel like that's code for we don't know if he would be killed in your prison. Because when they talk about him, and again, but like even still, he's been in rough shape, and I think he's actually already tried to take his life once. I'm not sure, but I know that has been having great mental instability for some time now, some years now. He's been trapped in this situation for years. Assange will, because I think about Epstein. Like are judges going to rule like that in high profile cases in which extradition might be the case to a U.S. prison? Like, oh, we don't know if he's going to remain alive in your prison. Assange will appear on Wednesday at Westminster Magistrates Court in West London for a new bail application, where his legal team is expected to refer to conditions at Belmarsh High Security Prison in South London against the backdrop of the worsening COVID-19 pandemic. Legal experts say they would be surprised if bail is granted, given Assange's categorization as a flight risk. Wearing a mask and a navy suit, the 49-year-old listened on Monday from the dock at the Central Criminal Court of England and Wales as the district judge, Vanessa Baritzer, initially knocked down arguments by his lawyers one after another and accepted the U.S. authorities' assertion that his alleged activities fell outside the realm of journalism. But turning to evidence by medical experts about Assange's precarious mental health, she said the overall impression is of a depressed and sometimes despairing man who is genuinely fearful about his future. I find that the mental condition of Mr. Assange is such that it would be oppressive to extradite him to the United States of America. The case against the 49-year-old relates to WikiLeaks' publication of hundreds of thousands of leaked documents about the Afghanistan and Iraq war, as well as diplomatic cables in 2010 and 2011. Prosecutors say Assange helped the U.S. defense analyst Chelsea Manning breach the U.S. Espionage Act, was complicit in hacking by others, and published classified information that endangered informants. Assange denies plotting with Manning to crack an encrypted password on U.S. computers and says there is no evidence anyone's safety was compromised. His lawyers argue the prosecution is politically motivated and that he is being pursued because WikiLeaks published U.S. government documents that revealed evidence of war crimes and human rights abuses. In her ruling, which triggered elation among Assange's supporters that he not be extradited, but dismay that it was solely based on health grounds, the judge said she had no reason to doubt that the usual constitutional and procedural protections would be applied to a trial he might face in the U.S. Unbelievable. Sending Assange across the Atlantic would not breach a bar on extradition for political offenses. She had no reason to doubt the usual constitutional procedural protections would be applied in a trial. He's not going to get off. He's not going to get off. They may not, the U.S. may not have him, but he's not going anywhere. And if anything, they are waiting for him to kill himself. The fact remains that someone like Assange during a time like now is very dangerous. The amount of information that needs to be... Because remember, keep in mind, this is all under the backdrop of massive censorship going on. A battle to repeal 230, to allow people to say what they want and how they feel, and as long as basically a U.S. court doesn't deem that it's violent or inciting hate or violence, then there's no reason that a company like YouTube can censor it. That's the whole thing. They're supposed to be censoring in case it was for smaller companies. You censor you don't have to censor yourself because you're a smaller company. But now that you're a larger company, you don't need government protection for censorship. And if you disappropriately or inappropriately censor people irreflective of your terms of service, then you can be challenged for that. But the whole thing is that they basically have the freedom to censor as they see fit, because under 230, that's because they still have 230. This is the weird thing about it. As far as I've come to understand it, as you can see, my trying to break this down is irritating, because the whole idea of censorship for smaller companies is or the lack of censorship for smaller companies is to try and protect them from things that may happen because they don't have the resources. Now, as a larger company, you should be able to effectively do that via your terms of service. So you don't need the stringency. And it's like, well, if you're not, because it's for publishers and in journalism, and then you have what they claim to be a public forum. And if they're a public forum, then they should be regulated as such without 230 regulations for an internet company. I think I broke that down correctly. But the thing about 230 explicitly for the Decency Communications Act is to protect smaller companies from liability in case violence is corralled on their platform one way or another. But let's move on here. China. Lots been happening with China. A lot of espionage related news, a lot of military related news. Obviously, the pandemic related stuff is still going on. We have the Wuhan files, explicitly released to, I believe, the Washington Post, talking about basically revealing that information was withheld from the World Health Organization, and then information that was given to World Health Organization inevitably was falsified. So then the World Health Organization had a choice to make whether or not they were going to proliferate false information, or what they knew at the time they didn't know was false information, and they did. And then they ended up finding out that it was false and continued to. So, mistakes were made all around. But we're going to read about China taking action against U.S. delisting of its telecom firms. It's part of this economic trade battle that's been ongoing that will probably cease once Biden comes into office. You will definitely see a sort of a relinquishing of that stance. There was some sort of financial mogul, or it was a professor in China, Didong Chang, I believe his name is. He was having a conference, and he was talking about who he knew and how he knew them. He was politically connected, and he was talking about Biden coming in and effectively changing the relationship economically between the U.S. and China for the better. And he was just saying, you're seeing companies talk. He himself said this. So this is a guy in China talking and reflecting upon the American political system related to banking and pharmaceutical industries and the tech industry and other insidious sort of institutions like the military. But I digress. Point is, he was saying you're seeing companies, you're seeing pharmaceutical reps, CEOs, things like that. You're seeing the captains of industry turn towards the White House, towards the executive branch, not because Biden's a nice guy or whatever, but because of his attitude towards doing business with them. But real quick, Reuters says China will take necessary measures to safeguard the interests of its companies after the New York Stock Exchange began delisting 3 Chinese telecom firms that Washington says has military ties. The country's commerce minister said on Saturday. Now, we have to understand that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, runs everything. It's still a communist government. They may have, capitalist means of purveying income. I mean, that's how you function. You want to generate income, you have to trade with the world. In order to do that, you have to trade within the system that has been established. I was going to say that we established. That has been established. So they got with the program, but they're still a communist country, and it's still a communist government. Everything is nationalized and centralized to them. The buck stops there. So the New York Stock Exchange said Thursday that it would delist China Mobile, China Unicom, and China Telecom following Donald Trump's move in November to bar U.S. investment in 31 firms that Washington says are owned or controlled by the Chinese military. It's the kind of abuse of national security and state power to suppress Chinese firms that does not comply with market rules and violates market logic. It only harms the legal rights of Chinese companies, but also not only harms the legal rights of Chinese companies, but also damages the interest of investors in other countries. Yeah, so we will see an about face come the Biden administration towards China. It will be fun to see the Democratic Party justify supporting him in doing so. But moving on, I was talking about that Seattle crime bill. I am reluctant to read Zero Hedge. Excuse me. There's a heavy slant when it comes to Zero Hedge, and I can understand the frustration, but that's not useful. And I mean, again, with most journalism these days, there's a noticeable slant, but we don't need something heavily biased and curse-laden. So, I'm going to read Seattle Times. A criminal defense for poverty, behavioral health, Seattle officials to weigh controversial proposal. Excuse me. Oh my God, is this, I didn't, oh geez, no. All right, so we are going to read Zero Hedge because it's a lengthy article justifying what I think, and let me get my slant beforehand. What I think is too far of a consideration. I don't want to say too far of a consideration. Maybe it is too far of a consideration. There are some things that are justified. Like I said, sleeping on a beach you shouldn't go to jail for, and I did go to jail numerous times for it. It's horrible. But you shouldn't be caught for an attempted like strong arm theft and then justify being poor, even though that is like being pushed. Poverty pushes you to desperation. Desperation pushes you to things you wouldn't normally do. Now that causation is true, but you can't justify the result of that desperation or that poverty every time you commit an action that is reprehensible. First of all, you'll never learn anything. And of course, it's not with everybody. I mean, some people are grateful for the opportunities they're given, the chances they're given, and then they do learn. But for the most part, that's not how this works. For the most part, when you're, I mean, and again, I think they're going to go through it, but there are definitely certain limitations, I believe, to what one can justify in the name of poverty, in the name of destitution. Coming from, I understand what it's like. I do. And I mean, I never tried to rob anybody. And that's kind of what I'm saying. You know, there were other ways to do things. There were ways to go about things other than going to that level, stooping to that point. And that was a conscious decision that I would rather go hungry than threaten someone's life for money, for food. I think life is more precious. I think my dignity is more precious. But I gave a lot of that away. Trust me, you give a lot of it away in that position, and I get it. But at some point, not even at some point, like it's part of the process of rehabilitating yourself. And at least for me, and I think for a lot of people, like that level of poverty requires some level of rehabilitation. You have to like reintegrate yourself into society when you've lived that level of existence. You're not even living when you've existed in that fashion for an extended period. But I digress. Let's read. Seattle bill could legalize crime for those in poverty or with behavioral issues, reads Zero Hedge. In what can be described as turning morality on its head, a Seattle council member has introduced legislation that could allow courts to dismiss misdemeanor crimes, such as theft and assault, that were committed because of poverty, or while a person was experiencing symptoms of a mental illness or substance abuse. Now, see, I don't recall those last portions. And honestly, the mental illness is more justifiable than substance abuse or poverty. I mean, but they all kind of coincide with each other. A lot of the time, at least out in California, from what I saw, remember, California's got over a quarter of the nation's homeless. Those that were homeless suffered from mental illness and substance abuse. If you don't, and by the way, we also have to keep in mind that that level of poverty, homelessness, destitution can elicit mental illness, right? Introduced by City Council member Lisa Herbold in late October, it reads, the legislation is a continuation of the city's social justice efforts in the wake of George Floyd's police encounter. With the bill crafted under the label Poverty Defense, its defenders say that it aims to ease the burden of usual court rulings on lower-income residents, but has some worried it will pave the way for crimes like assault, harassment, communicating with a minor for immoral purposes, and more to go unpunished. Well, I mean, there should be a list, right? Like, don't speculate. Give me a list. I think when you're talking about folks who are committing offenses to survive or because of underlying mental health or substance use issues, incarceration does not have the deterrent effect people believe it has. No, it certainly doesn't. Recidivism is high. King County Director of Public Defense Anita Kandawal, when defending the bill, used the example of someone without shoes stealing a pair from Goodwill and explained an attorney could acquit the thief of wrongdoing on the basis that they didn't own one. A similar example would be a person guilty of a carjacking being acquitted of the crime based on the fact they did not own a car because they could not afford one. See, this would actually increase workload because you would have to, as a judge, I would hope, have enough sense to discern each case on its own merit. So if someone steals a car, no, there's no justification for stealing. I mean, maybe your wife is pregnant. Maybe, your best friend just got stabbed. Maybe then there might be a justification. But I'd just be like, call an Uber, call 911 for your wife. And I mean, same for your friend. No, there's no justification for this. That doesn't make sense. No, you cannot justify carjacking. This is what I mean. There are definitely reprehensible things that do not have justification. Okay, and poverty is not going to do it. From the Seattle Times, drunk or high driving, and domestic violence assault are carved out as exceptions in the bill. Okay, what's left in has been troubling to some who point out misdemeanors like non-domestic assault, harassment, communicating with a minor for immoral purposes, and more. I see. So it's basically they've created exceptions and then left things in. Like I guess there's more that were left out than left in. In a statement published Friday, police reform group Mothers for Police Accountability worried that a person committing assault would be acquitted by simply asserting that they were suffering from anxiety or depression, or the triggering of some past trauma or some other symptom of a mental disorder, including alcoholism or addiction. Some also expressed concern about what then would happen once people with behavioral issues were back on the street, and criticized the idea for lacking a plan to then address behavioral health and economic issues at the root of people's behavior. So I actually mentioned, right, about how, mental health and destitution and substance abuse were tied together. Right. I didn't go to the other aspect of this, is that getting off doesn't actually help you. There's no rehabilitation there. This is all about rehabilitation. Ultimately, you want people to be rehabilitated, reintegrated into society. So you need things like vocational programs. You need things like job placement programs. You need things like outreach and outpatient. Okay. All of these things are what helped me to become the fine young individual you see before you. No, but I mean, in all seriousness, besides a will to live and a desire to do better for myself, you have to understand that there's a psychic shift that has to occur. There are people who have mental health issues who can't have that psychic shift or that perceptual shift without drugs, without pharmaceutical drugs, antipsychotics, antipsychotics, schizophrenic drugs. There's another term for it. But there are steps that are required in order to not have recidivism, so that basically the same person, like they're saying, is coming in and using the same excuse. And it's not an excuse if you're actually in the situation, but if you're not doing anything to change your situation, what is it then? Right? You always say two things can be true at once? Can it be both excuse and yes, it's true, but you're using it as an excuse to justify your misbehavior, right? Do you need help? Yes, that's ultimately what this and here the thing, it's in the right place, but it's like they said, it's not addressing the root issue. But I digress. It's just I can go on and on, but we still, got things to go over. It's COVID time. It's been COVID time. It's gonna be COVID, and here's the thing: it shouldn't be COVID time for a long time because, as I've been saying, it's been introduced into the biosphere. It's endemic. We're going to be dealing with this for years and years and years and years to come in a variety of ways. Hopefully, it does not mutate to become deadlier. However, this idea that is being purported, this idea that is being utilized by the government, that we need to wait for COVID to go away before we can get back to living, is a fallacy. It's a false one. It doesn't make sense. It's ringing. It's antithetical to what the WHO is increasingly saying and what Fauci is saying. I mean, 90% immunity is highly unlikely. 90% of everyone on the planet, I believe he's suggesting, must be immune, or I think in the country. That's another thing. He never really specifies. He gives this sort of quandary where he's raising the bar posts 65, 75, 85, 95, 75, 85. Anyway, and no one really asks questions, or no one really really presses him about the ethics of that. But not only do we have that, but we have like conflicting situations. So in China, in Wuhan, where all this started, they're celebrating ass to ass with no masks, right? We're seeing mask mandates or pseudo mandates that were happening over the lockdown that didn't work, and you saw rapid increase during the second wave. You saw lockdowns that didn't work, but then like California let up too quickly, and then you saw an earlier second wave, a mass increase of infections. But I always say this with the caveat that just because someone's infected, just because you have an increase in positive COVID infections, doesn't necessarily mean that the situation is becoming more desperate. Again, you must corroborate positive infection increases with ICU admissions with deaths, okay? Because if you're seeing people, again, 90 people out of 100 get COVID, and out of those 90, 80 of them don't even express any symptoms, and the other 10 get a mild cold-like expression. Obviously, the disease isn't that, it's not deadly. Like, it's not that serious. It's serious for vulnerable demographics, but we have to be serious here, okay? It's like 82 million globally infected, 1.6, 1.7 dead. That's like a little over 2% death rate. That's the death rate that the flu used to have before they mixed in all of the stats. Remember, always keep in mind, I'm like, I'm like a clock, right? The same every cast here, every night. I want to remind you of these things because as much as they may try to craft a different narrative, this stuff has all been published. That's why I love to do the video portion, so that you can see for yourself the articles that I'm reading. I'm just simply reading the news. I'm just following the trail of breadcrumbs that's being left by the news, and whether or not those breadcrumbs fall down the memory hole is irrelevant to me because I've, for posterity, have recorded it. It's been here. It's been documented. So that makes me feel okay, because when you have people come to you, normal people you're having conversations with, and tell you, well, this, Fox News said this, ABC News said this, MSNBC News said this, read this on the news. And it's like, well, one, how much of it did you actually read? But two, did you realize like they've said something completely different just several months ago? I mean, it's important to follow the trail here, but I digress. It's COVID time. No. So 4 deaths. This is actually fun. 4 deaths in elderly reported from 3 countries during first days of vaccine rollout. We've seen, I believe, over 10 AEFIs, adverse effects from immunizations. For Pfizer, we've seen several from Moderna, including an important one related to facial fillers, something that apparently millions of people get every year. You're beautiful the way you are. It's not worth it. But we're seeing lots and lots of reactions. We read just on Friday, I believe, that the FDA is conducting a study regarding the reactions here, the adverse reactions. So they're real and they're plentiful, and apparently, according to the WHO, who has a e-training related to vaccines, their own information, for the measles vaccine, you get 1 in 1 million. So what's happening here? 1 in 1 million suffers an adverse reaction, and from already this alone, we don't even have anywhere near a million, I think, vaccinated, and we've seen dozens of reactions. But I digress. In the first days of COVID-19, reads the Epoch Times, at least 4 deaths from heart attacks were reported in people between the ages of 75 and 91 in 3 countries. In the first days of the COVID-19 vaccine rollouts, at least 4 deaths from heart attacks were reported in people between 75 and 91 in 3 countries. These deaths all took place between 2 hours and 5 days after the Pfizer BioNTech COVID vaccine was administered. In all cases, they had comorbidities. In Kalmar, Sweden, an 85-year-old man with pre-existing conditions died of a heart attack on the 29th, the day after receiving the shot. In Israel, there were 2 deaths, one in a 75-year-old man from Bet She'an who died of a heart attack after 2 hours after vaccination. The second, an 88-year-old man, died in Jerusalem, also 2 hours after the vaccination. In Lucerne, Switzerland, a 91-year-old man, a nursing home resident, died 5 days after receiving the vaccination, all Pfizer. Israeli media urged people not to assume the vaccines caused the deaths. In an article reporting on the 2 deaths, the Jerusalem Post highlighted a call for transparency from the manufacturers. Exactly. In response to the report of those deaths, Israel Medat Association said when the vaccines are administered to at-risk population, there may be unforeseen cases. One should not infer from this about the safety of the vaccine, but welcome the transparency required from the pharma companies in the drug approval process. The elderly in nursing and care homes were first in line to receive the vaccines as they were considered most vulnerable. Following the death of the man in Sweden on the 29th, Swedish health authorities were interviewed by media outlets. In their comments, they neither dismissed nor confirmed that the man died as a result of the vaccine. They did promise a full investigation. The 85-year-old man's death was reported by the Swedish Medical Products Agency as well as the Federal Health Agency, which Chief Medical Officer Dr. Matthias Alvinger said was due to the timing. The death occurring so soon after the injection. It's not up to us, he quoted in Swedish media, stressing it was a matter of protocol. Considering all the worry about the safety of COVID vaccines, it's all the more urgent that we are fully transparent and follow established protocols. I don't want to be dismissive. I don't want to be like, yeah, whatever. You guys are just, but like, this is what I've been talking about. Pfizer did not deliver on its data until just before its approval. Okay, let me rephrase that. The data trickled out about the trials that it held, but it wasn't until right before it was approved. We read on air here that they didn't include like teenagers until later. No, they didn't include the elderly until later on in the study, and they didn't include teenagers at all. Pfizer's had the most reactions that we've seen, and this is around the country. I should have had that list because there was someone I follow on Twitter who had taken up a list and had referenced articles. I'd love a good list. Keep it empirical and data driven, but I digress. Another series of reactions, unfortunately. I just want to highlight this briefly for just a second for our listeners. Looking at an article from SciPost.org. I'll be sharing some, like I said, sociological, psychological papers and research stuff and articles. It'll be interesting. But this is one of many to come, and I found this interesting. Americans with authoritarian tendencies are less inclined to wear masks amid the COVID-19 pandemic. So here is the thing for me, right? To equate not wearing a mask with authoritarian tendencies, and actually, I think at some point they equate it to conspiracy theories, and low intelligence, is interesting, given you have what I would consider people of high intellectual stamina. I consider high intellect, doctors, clinicians, epidemiologists, researchers, who've talked, in opposition about everything from the lockdowns to mask mandates to vaccines. Now, I'm not suggesting all of them are correct. I'm not suggesting really one way or the other about them. I'm merely pointing out that people with PhDs and doctorates are intelligent, and they generally don't buy into into conspiracy theories and things that don't make sense. You don't get paid the big bucks. Well, some of them, some of them. Because actually, now that I think about it, some of the doctors that I recall were plastic surgeons who were speaking about the possibility of adverse reactions due to vaccines. I think that's a good reminder of that, but I digress. The point is that these are intelligent people. These are intelligent people who mind their manners and understand the world and have risen to a stature that has allowed them, through being intelligent, to, I believe, at least have some credibility behind what they're saying. I really don't want to read this because most of the article is sort of ad hoc attacks at people who have, they're considered controversial opinion, but people who try to be more considerate about everything that's going on as far as the pandemic and what they should do. And I'll put it that way. So not necessarily anti-maskers or anti-vaxxers, but they kind of put everyone who isn't adhering wholeheartedly to what has been implemented as far as policy as an authoritarian. So another time, I'm not dealing with that. Speaking of authoritarian, England entered toughest COVID lockdown since March. The first lockdown didn't work. The second lockdown is allegedly as a result of the more transmissible strain of COVID that exists. However, it's not deadlier. It's more transmissible. It's more communicable. I mean, I'm not suggesting that that's not dangerous. Obviously, that's dangerous. But again, if your first lockdown didn't work when it was less transmissible, I don't know how you think your second one's going to work. A, B, and C. I'm not really sure that that's the move. I don't like Gavin Newsom, but I really am supportive of his ICU availability related lockdown. This mass boot doesn't work. But let's read briefly. The Guardian reads, England will enter its toughest nationwide lockdown since March, with schools closed until mid-February, as Boris Johnson warned that weeks ahead will be the hardest yet, just like Biden. As new figures put the UK on course to exceed 100,000 COVID-related deaths before the end of the month without urgent action, the Prime Minister said once again that people must stay home with exercise limited to once a day. What? All non-essential shops were told to close from Monday night. I'll do it later. Thank you. The lockdown will last for at least 7 weeks, with measures to be reviewed during half-term week. Any relaxation would not come into effect before the 22nd of February. Just a day after urging millions of pupils to return to the classroom, Johnson announced all schools would switch to remote learning. You see what I mean? Let me not. And this is right after the WHO said, hey guys, COVID's not going anywhere, and 90% immunity is the only likelihood we're going to have to, quote unquote, eliminate it. It's a coronavirus, and like the cold and the flu, we will deal with it in a seasonal manner. But the Prime Minister said parents would reasonably ask why we did not make this decision sooner, he said, adding, I completely understand the inconvenience and distress this late change will cause millions of parents and pupils up and down the country. So there is a joint biosecurity center that has recommended moving the COVID alert not from 4 to 5. There's a COVID alert, similar to the terrorist alert, color coordinated, starting from 1 to 5. 1 being COVID is not known to be present. 2, COVID is present, but the number of cases is low. 3, a COVID epidemic is in general circulation. 4, a COVID epidemic is in general circulation. Transmission is high or rising. And 5, there is a material risk of healthcare services being overwhelmed. I will pull up their stats because I'd like to know ICU admissions. It's a simple matter of if you're having a bunch of people who are staying there overnight for observation, that's not tactically sound. That doesn't logistically make sense. But I digress. England's on a lockdown, and we'll see how that unfolds. The prison population, obviously, has been devastated, and I can only imagine what that situation must be like, right? Because with a weakening immune system, a lot of things can happen, right? So if you're not taking care of yourself, then obviously that puts you at risk. Okay, it's the same thing with, with the flu, right? If you have respiratory issues, the flu can kill you. I mean, the flu can kill you anyway, but it's going to deal with you in a very unscrupulous manner. But Time reads, with over 275,000 infections and 1,700 deaths, COVID-19 has devastated the U.S. prison and jail population. Yeah, wow. But again, though, okay, so 10% of 275,000 is 27, right? Is 2,700, 2,700. No. Yeah. This is me being horrible at math, but I'm still going to try. It is 27,500. Right, that's 10%. Half of 27,500 is something like 13,250. That's 5%. So 2.5%, half of 13,000 is 7,500, right? I think I'm still there. So it's less than 2%. I'm not saying it's not horrible, and I can't imagine being incarcerated and having to deal with this. And again, this affects everyone differently. Your level of health, just like the flu, will basically determine how badly this afflicts you. But the mortality rate is like less than 1%. It's like 0.8, 0.6. I didn't break it. I don't feel like breaking it down. I'm horrible at math. But I try to put things in perspective because all life matters, and I try to make intelligent decisions regarding my life and the life of those around me. It's about making smart choices. It's not about disregarding people or being unsafe or being an authoritarian. It's about hearing and digesting information and making a mindful choice for yourself. But, that's a horrible thing that is happening regarding the prison system. We'll read a little bit here. Mario Smith first broke out in cold sweats on November 21st. He thought it was just exhaustion from working maintenance shifts at the Gus Harrison Correctional Facility in Adrian, Michigan, where he's been incarcerated since 2018. But then guards came to his cell on the 23rd, he says, and told him to report to another area of the prison. Smith knew he must have tested positive. I feared for my life, he tells Time. The 37-year-old has asthma. That's what I'm talking about. He has asthma, high blood pressure, and obesity. He's fucked. No, let me not like dismiss him and hex him, but that's what I'm talking about. Situations where you have pre-existing conditions that you are in a high risk demographic. This is the whole thing. If you have most of the people who are getting infected basically either going through a minor or even a moderate cold or less, I'm not suggesting being incarcerated with COVID isn't horrible, but I think being incarcerated with any illness is pretty horrible, right? The problem is that our prison health system is horrible, and I think therein lies the issue. In a system that is neglectful to its inmates to begin with, do we really want to add a pandemic to the case? But to continue, obviously, this all put him at risk for severe illness and complications. Sentenced to life in prison when he was 17, Smith recently had his sentence reduced to 30 years minimum, but remembers worrying that he might die in prison after all. Smith is one of at least 1,400 inmates, and he's one of over 1,400 inmates and over 20,000 incarcerated Americans throughout Michigan who have tested positive for COVID since the pandemic. As of December 28, 108 inmates have died from the virus throughout the state, 6 of whom were incarcerated at this facility, Gus Harrison Correctional. In a statement sent to Times, the Department of Correction from Michigan says the facility has taken a number of measures to protect against COVID, as well as slow the spread. These measures include testing prisoners and staff members every week and suspending in-person visitation in March. Oh, that's horrible. That is horrible. We clean every facility with disinfectant. Yeah. You do what you can. You do what you should be doing anyway, honestly. But you do what you do during flu season. You disinfect heavily. You don't touch a lot of people, and you do fucking try not to sneeze and cough on people. But to see, and this is what I'm saying. The heavy-handed byproduct is that they haven't had visitors since March. Can you imagine not seeing anyone from the outside for a year? Well, I mean, we're not coming. We'll be on March in a couple months, so almost a year. Like, I just think the responses are disproportionate. I do. I think they should be reevaluated given the collateral damage. But into something bizarre, Health Human Services overturns plan to impose a $14,000 fee on distilleries that made hand sanitizer. I mean, COVID has revealed the depth to which bureaucracy can go, even at the detriment of everyone around them. It is amazing. Health officials this week overturned fees that would, I mean, at least they overturned them, but health officials this week overturned fees that were being imposed on distilleries that made hand sanitizer early last year. Two different fees, including a $14,000 one, were included in the COVID-19 relief package that was signed in March. That package made distilleries that produce hand sanitizer over-the-counter drug monograph facilities and forced them to pay fees. What? COVID-19 is the disease caused by... Oh, Jesus. Okay. We don't need... I mean, yeah, I can agree, but that's not what I want to hear. That's not news. That's your opinion. It says it's Zero Hedge. That's why. I didn't even notice. Of course it is. Distilleries made hand sanitizer because there was a nationwide shortage, obviously. The fees were due on February 12th. The FDA alerted distilleries this week that the fees were needed to be paid. In a public notice, the administration noted it was authorized to collect fees by the CARES Act. However, a Health and Human Services spokesperson said Thursday the fees were being reversed. Small businesses who stepped up to fight COVID should be applauded by their government, not taxed. I'm pleased to announce that we have decided to remain decently human and we're not going to I'm pleased to announce we have directed FDA to cease enforcement of these arbitrary surprise user fees. Happy New Year, distilleries, and cheers to you for helping keep us safe. It is disturbing when it's considered being thrown a bone when you are absolved of fees that you incurred trying to help everyone not get sick. And I mean, if I read that correctly, weren't they forced to do this? Two different fees were included in the relief signed law. That package made distilleries that produced hand sanitizers over-the-counter drug monograph facilities and forced them to... I see. So although, and that's weird, that's an interesting money grab. So they do this of their own volition, and you tax them because they basically switched up what they were doing. They used their massive infrastructure, right? Their over-the-counter drug monograph facilities. They used their massive infrastructure to create hand sanitizer, and oh my God. The HHS lawyers found that the fees were issued in a manner that has the force and effect of a legislative rule, which only the HHS secretary has the authority to issue, not because it was unethical. The Distilled Spirits Council had reacted to the fees with surprise, issuing a press release urging the FDA to waive them for hundreds of distilleries who helped make hand sanitizer amid the pandemic. I mean, what is there more to say? On the other half of the show, we're coming to the end here. If I need to go eat something, this has been a long day of bullshit. Dr. Fauci on mandatory vaccines. So we saw, and I actually misread that. I'm going to issue a correction on myself. I've been talking about Assembly Bill, New York Assembly, State Assembly Bill A416. I mentioned, as you can see for viewers, all of my web pages, all of a uniform color. I've changed the color on my browser. That was to my detriment, because the graphic that I mentioned, the New York State Assembly government website having, I thought the dot was past the State Assembly and Senate and was going to be signed by the governor. It hasn't gotten there yet. It is it hasn't hit the floor yet. So there's still time to bitch and moan about it. But what it says basically is that during a health emergency declared by the governor and or health officials or head health officials have the authority to involuntarily detain anyone that they deem a threat to public health. Now, they have been talking about not making vaccines mandatory. I forgot what state. Something tells me it was Texas, but some state legislature tried to bring up mandatory vaccinations and was immediately, that was immediately dismissed. But we're seeing this now become on the table as Fauci talks about 90% immunity. Voluntarily, that's not going to happen. And if they try to make it mandatory, You're still not going to have it because you're still going to have people who are going to refuse, period. That's just not, and I think you will have more people who will refuse it pending it becoming mandatory. But let's read what Newsweek's got to say. Dr. Fauci on mandatory COVID vaccines. Everything will be on the table. Fauci said, I'm sure some individual institutions will make coronavirus vaccines mandatory, while it is quite possible that the vaccine could become a required travel vaccine when visiting other countries. Speaking to Newsweek, he said everything will be on the table for discussion when asked if he will be discussing the possibility of introducing COVID-19 vaccine passports and potential mandatory vaccinations at a local level, including in schools, in his role as chief medical advisor to Biden. The director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases noted, it's not up to me to make a decision, but these are things that are on the table to be discussed under a Biden administration. Could COVID-19 vaccines become mandatory? The immunologist doesn't believe there will be a national COVID-19 vaccine mandate because we almost never mandate these things federally with regards to health. I'm not sure it's the vaccine that's going to be mandatory from a central government standpoint, like federal government mandates, but there are going to be individual institutions that I'm sure are going to mandate it. For example, influenza and hepatitis B vaccines are mandated at many hospitals. Here at the NIH, I would not be allowed to see patients if I didn't get vaccinated every year with flu and get vaccinated once with Hep B. I have to get certified every year. If I didn't, I couldn't see patients. And I've actually talked about this, what you're going to see, and I've put up a little poll before, and it's like, would you go to your favorite festival if it required you to be vaccinated at the venue? And that's what it is. It's going to be de facto mandatory, right? You can't get on a plane. You can't come into a school. You can't go into a movie theater. You can't walk into a store without being vaccinated. They're either going to use the contact tracing application, or they're going to use, they're not going to use a graphene tattoo. It's not going to be RFID. Oh my God, they'll go to uphold RFID. It's like, no, the RFID was a logistical support apparatus, put in place to, count how many vaccines were used in a particular area, count how many were used overall, count how many have been taken in batches, so on and so forth. It's a logistical thing. I get it. Makes sense. But they're still talking about like these coronavirus vaccine bans, and he's talking about a coronavirus vaccine passport. I mean, and if they use your actual passport has an RFID in it. So, but, oh my God. So in New Zealand, Nature has a study, and I urge you to go read it for yourself because I'm not going to cut through it. But it's the genomic epidemiology reveals transmission patterns and dynamics of SARS-CoV-2 in a place in New Zealand. In New Zealand, a geographically remote Pacific island with easily sealable borders, they implemented a nationwide lockdown of all non-essential services to curb the spread of COVID-19. Here, we generate 649 SARS-CoV genome sequences from infected patients in New Zealand, with samples collected during the quote-unquote first wave, representing 56% of all confirmed cases in this time period. Despite its remoteness, the viruses imported into New Zealand represented nearly all of the genomic diversity sequenced from the global virus population. So they got it all there. They got a whole variety, despite them being remote. These data helped to quantify the effectiveness of public health interventions. For example, the effective reproductive manner of New Zealand's largest cluster decreased from 7 to 0.2% within the first week of lockdown. Similarly, only 90% of virus introductions into New Zealand resulted in ongoing transmission of more than one additional case. So through contact tracing, they were able to determine that it only got as far as one other person. When an infected person was detected, it only got as far as one other person in whom they infected further. Overall, these results demonstrate the utility of genomic pathogen surveillance to inform public health and disease mitigation. I would posit population density. I would also posit culture being an issue, but like culture has to do with personal responsibility. So that one not so much as like population density. Like I said, New Zealand is remote, but besides it being remote, it is not a densely clustered thing like New York City or LA, for example. But I urge you to read it. It is interesting. I always want to try and cover as much of everything as I can. Like I said, there needs to be a selective way in which lockdowns and mandates are done, and I'm not one for the heavy hand. But now we will get into a little politics here. This was just an article on how Biden had replaced the inaugural parade with a short walk to the White House. Bloomberg wants me to sign up. It's not going to happen. I'm too broke for that. However, the shifting culture, the shifting tide, it goes from the top to the bottom. But you see the optics of their behavioral change. So no parades, and I'm going to wear a mask on TV. But behind the scenes, they're going and they're visiting their family members. They're going to get their hair did and blaming the salon. Thanks, Nancy Pelosi. They're going and fixing their houses up to make sure that it was winterized, right? I remember that. So it's always for me a matter of pointing out the hypocrisy, right? For those of you who got your stimulus, the stimmies have been sent out. Parents with babies born in 2020 could qualify for $1,100 extra in stimulus cash. Just going to go through this real quick. Channel 3 News Memphis reads, eligible parents who welcomed a new baby in 2020 and haven't received economic impact payment for their child as a dependent could qualify for up to $1,100 in extra stimulus. Children born between January 1st and December 31st of 2020 qualify for both stimulus payments if their parents meet income limits, $500 from the first check and $600 from the second round. The reason why some stimulus check recipients may have missed out on the extra cash is that the Treasury and the IRS used 2019 tax returns to calculate the payments, which would not have included babies in 2020. The child credits are subject to the same phase-outs based on income limits as payments for adults. $75,000 if you're a single filer, $112,500 if you're head of household, $150,000 if you're married or and file a joint return. And remember, those limitations, like for $75,000, it's like for every $100 above $75,000, they take $5, I believe, from the check. But yeah, just again, Pelosi, McConnell's home, speaking of stimulus, were vandalized due to their partisanship. Here's the thing, and I just wanted to touch down on this briefly because we already talked about this on Friday, I think. I do not condone the vandalism. I do not condone the violence. I do not condone the zealotry. However, I have to appreciate that I have to appreciate the plague on both of their houses. You know, it is rightfully fair that both of them should suffer the same fate for their property. Same fate, period. Because it was the two of them, well, really, it was the two of them, Biden and Schumer, that determined that we should not receive $2,000 in our stimulus due to their posture of austerity and budget deficit hawkery. But I wonder about that pig's head. I guess the pig's head in front of Pelosi's house was real. That's pretty macabre. Mitch kills poor, written on Mitch McConnell's window. Where's my money? Where's spelled WERRS. Yeah. And then Nancy Pelosi gets to be speaker again. So force the vote didn't work. AOC didn't challenge. What's her name? Kathleen Rice ended up getting AOC's committee seat on the House Energy Committee, which was supposed to be AOC's bread and butter. And it's a pity. It is a pity. It is a pity because as much power as she wields, none of it seems to trickle down to the people who matter. But yeah. There's a few things, but I think I'm gonna cut it short here. We'll talk about them tomorrow. Talk about the plan to blacklist staff who worked for the Trump administration. This coincides with AOC and companies' plan to get a list of pro-Trumpies. I think that may actually tie a bit into why Twitter might be purging the account. I don't know, because as you know, they used to copy. Well, not used to. I think Obama's the only one that's had a Twitter, as far as presidential Twitters go. But they switched. They took the users and basically duplicated the account. But they'll be purging it this time around. Everything is far too contentious. And as I continue to say, if you eliminate communication, you only leave expatriation, incarceration, or elimination. That said, please like, share, and subscribe. We will see you tomorrow. Be well to yourself and to each other. Take care.